Hello class, we're learning about Ulrich Beck's Risk Society. I think this Risk Society topic has been the much talked about topic in the recent years. But Ulrich Beck saw about this Risk Society right in 1986. Ulrich Beck was born on 15th May 1944 in erstwhile Germany. He was a well-known German sociologist and he served as professor in various universities, and he died on 1st January 2015. These are few of his major contributions. The first and the most debated or the most talked about work is Gesellschaft or the Risk Society in 1986, the Reflexive Modernization 1994, World Risk Society 1998, What is Globalization 1999, The Brave New World of Work 1999, and the Metamorphosis of the World 2016. And he is considered as the most cited social scientist in the world during his lifetime. And he coined terms like risk society, second modernity, or reflexive modernization. And risk society is his major work. Gesellschaft was published in 1986, but was translated from German to English by Mark Ritter in 1992 and was titled Risk Society Towards a New Modernity. We exist in the modern world a bit in a new form of modernity. And when he talks about modernity, he talks about two different types of modernity. The first modernity, which was associated with the industrial society, while the second modernity, which is associated with technology and risk. And the characteristics of the first modernity can be identified as a nation-state boundary, where people had definite boundary and they had collective patterns of life, progress and controllability, full employment and exploitation of nature. But in risk society, it poses a challenge to the enlightenment-based modernity, or it was a consequence of the classical modernity. The first modernity has been undermined by what he argued as the 5 interlinked processes. He talks about the following processes and he says that this was an unforeseen consequence of the victory of the first industrial modernization. And the interlinked processes are globalization, individualization, gender revolution, underemployment, and global risk. Global risk means the ecological crisis and the crash of the global financial markets. Beck labels a new form of modernity as reflexive modernity. A process of individualization has taken place in the West. And he defines risk as an approach to foresee and control the future consequences of human action. The various unintended consequences of radical modernization, or he says in simple terms, a systematic way of dealing with hazards and insecurities induced and introduced by modernization itself. These are the few characteristics of first and second modernity. The classical stage of modernity or the first modernity was identified with the industrial society. So while the emerging new modernity is associated with risk society, the newly formed society is reflexive in nature, in which there is less structural constraints. People are free and are able to create not only themselves but also the societies. The social relationships are individually chosen and social ties are becoming more reflexive. The social relations are established, maintained and constantly renewed by individuals. In first modernity, the central issue was wealth and how it should be distributed. Second modernity, the central issue is risk and how it could be prevented, minimized, or channelized. While the social class is central in industrial society, risk is fundamental to risk society. For Beck, the old world is actually slowly diminishing. The first modernity, which has industrialization, collector styles, that is slowly replaced by the new world order or the decline of the traditional methods of doing things. Characteristics of newly emerging society. Second modernity, which is replacing the age of simple modernity. Global risk society, which brings growing uncertainty. Risk now is not about earthquakes and floods. Risk is all about new technologies and their consequences, and also the computer dependency and the revolution of computer. Life is more risky. A reflexive modernity in which people become more and more aware of the problems inherent in the family in the first modernity. An individualized society where the safe structures of modernity has involved stable family, protected and stable jobs, strong local bodies, and class loyalties. The world become more individualized rather than collective. A cosmopolitan society is one which looks beyond the borders and boundaries of nation state and fixed identities. He talks about four major groups: the super rich, the overworked middle class, the working poor, and those with no work at all. This could be a blueprint for the future. And he talks about these characters, categorization, as I said. So the last category, that is those with no work, are actually living in utter poverty. And risk to a great degree are being produced by the source of wealth in modern society. Industry and its side effects are producing a wide range of hazardous waste, and which eventually is hurtful to all the people around. The history of risk distribution shows that risk adheres to the class pattern but inversely. Thus, poverty attracts an unfortunate abundance of risk. Risk is central in poor nation, while nations are able to push many risks as far as possible. They are also producing or selling technologies which we can, give as a preventive method for various other societies. The last thing is the boomerang effect. He says that neither wealthy individuals nor the nations that produce risk are safe from risk. There will be a boomerang effect, which means the effects will be returned to the person of origin, to the person or to the place of origin. So just to recap, this is a concept which was put forward by Ulrich Beck. He's a German, and it was in 1986 that he gave this book, The Risk Society. He coined a few terms like risk society, second modernity, and reflexive modernization. And he talks about the transformation of society from the first to the second. Second modernity as reflexive modernity, or a process of individualization. And he talks about a systematic way of dealing with hazardous insecurities induced and introduced by modernization itself. In first modernity, the central issue was wealth, but in the risk society, Risk is the central point. Industry and its effects are producing a wide range of hazardous problems. We know that the industries in and around the place we live are actually experiencing a lot of problems which deal with environment. There is effluence, there is air pollution, sound pollution. So a lot of pollution are happening around, and that is what he talks about the risk. He says that all these risks were created as a byproduct of the first modernization. This byproduct was actually not seen or even conceptualized by the makers of the first modernity. While social risks are central to industrial society, risk is central to risk society. The risk, when you think about risk, poor nations, it is risky for them. It is more painful to adjust to all the things that happens around. But the rich nation are able to keep away this risk. And there is a boomerang effect. That is, whatever we give, we will be getting it back. So if we are, destroying the environment, we will be facing this environmental issue in future. Thank you.